In this video, we're going to take a look at rendering particles using Octane for Cinema 4D. And for this video, I'm using the particles.c4d scene. And you can see I have a very simple particle simulation going on here. It's just a particle object that is bouncing off of a bunch of deflectors. Pretty simple stuff. First thing you need to do, of course, is set up your instance for your particle. To do this, you can select your emitter and then go to Tags, C4D Octane Object Tag. And then in the Object Tag options under Particle Rendering, you can set this to Sphere and then choose the object that you want to instance to the particles. So in this case, I just clicked on this arrow and then selected the sphere. But of course, it could be any geometric object. It just so happens I chose a sphere for this example, but it could be a cube. The next thing you want to do is set up your material. So let's go into the Octane Live Viewer and do a render, just so we can sort of see. And I can play this. It's fast enough so you can see it update pretty quickly. Let's go to the node editor and take a look at the material. So I've just applied a basic diffuse material to the sphere. So you can see it's applied right here. And I have a gradient going into the diffuse input, and the gradient goes from red to green. For the input on the gradient, I'm using the random color texture. And this is specifically designed to be used with particle instances or other types of instances. So it's just randomizing the colors applied to the spheres. So let's say instead of just having a random color, you wanted to change, say, the color over time. So in this case, I'm going to choose the instance color texture, and let's plug this into diffuse. We're just getting white textures here. So the first thing we need to do is set this to particle. And then let's choose the particle. So I'm going to click on this arrow and then choose my emitter, and everything turns blue. We see that the color mode right now is display color. So instead, let's set this to age. There we go. Just play with the gradient a little bit, and you can see that over time, the particles become lighter in color. So move this over so that they're getting white as they age. So you can even add another color in here. Let's add like a green. And then, of course, you have other inputs like radius, mass, density, travel distance, rotation, and spin. I'm just using a very simple particle object, so age seems to be the best input on this. But if you have a more complex particle simulation here in Cinema 4D, then you can use some of these other inputs to change the color over time. The other node that we have that we can use to affect the color of the particles is instance range. So I'm going to create one of these nodes and plug it into diffuse. And in this case, we're just getting either white or black particles. So what's going on here? Well, essentially what's going on is this is taking the ID of the particles as they're being born into the scene, and it's applying a color between white and black to each particle based on its ID. The maximum ID number is set to 0, so essentially it's just alternating. Every other particle is either white or black. If I increase the maximum ID range, let's say I set this to 5, you can see now I'm starting to get gray. So it's going from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then starting over again at 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're basically, the 0 particle is white, then they start to get gradually more gray, and then they turn black when they hit 5. So we have a small range to work with here, but it's bigger than a range of 0. If I set this to 100, and then play, we're going to see that the range now goes for every 100 particles. If I set this up to 1,000, you can see now we have a gradual gradient based on the particle IDs. So you could also use this as an input to a gradient if you didn't want to do just black or white. So I could put this into diffuse, and then instead of random color, I'll put in that instant range. And now we're going from green to red, or red to green rather. So that's the basic idea behind instance range. Another way to use the instance color node is instead of using the particle as a source, we could use a file, like a texture map. So I'm going to plug this back into diffuse. So this is what we were using before. We were coloring it by the age. But instead of the source being particle, I'm going to set this to file. And then I'm going to choose a file. And the image I'm going to use is called color grid. It's a very low resolution image. So let's copy it to our directory. You can see now we have purple particles. So I'm going to switch over to Photoshop here. Here's the actual image, and it's very low resolution, and I'm going to zoom in so you can see the individual pixels. So what's going on when you're using this method is that as each particle is being born, it's being assigned one of these pixels, one at a time, one for each particle, and it's going across this bottom row. So we're going from light purple to darker purple, over to darker red, all the way to black, and then it starts again with this row, and it keeps going one row at a time all the way across the image. And as you can see, I've just divided this into a few colors with some darkness on this side. So as we get more and more particles, eventually we'll get green to dark green to blue to dark blue to black, and so on. So if I play this, we'll probably only get through a couple rows of the image, but that's the basic idea. If I increase the number of particles, I'll go to the emitter, and let's set the particle birth rate to, I don't know, 500. Rewind and play it. So you can see we're already starting to get green and blue. Okay, so there we go. Starting over, we're getting a lot of particles here, where it's going from purple all the way to black. And eventually we start to get our green and blues. So that's another way you can have control over the color of your particles. So that's the basics of working with particles in Octane for Cinema 4D.